Hello and welcome. I am Annemie, and today my voice is brought to you by Lemsip and Strepsils. Yes, it turns out that talking for an extended period every day as we get towards the winter months does start to take its toll, but here I am, hopped up on drugs with another Euro Truck Soliloquy. For those of you who aren't aware, this is where I play Euro Truck Simulator and talk about some things which have captured my imagination this week in the news, or possibly from a while back, some form of, not necessarily current affairs, let's just call it affairs. So the big news story of the week is Battlefront 2, the new game by EA, not to be confused with Battlefront 2, the old game by EA. And this game has had some trouble with loot boxes. We've seen a lot of games get into trouble for their loot boxes and microtransactions this year. But Battlefront is the one that has somewhat taken the biscuit. So, first off, we started with players playing the game and complaining that it would take them too long to unlock Darth Vader. Darth Vader, as some of you might be aware of, is a rather iconic Star Wars character, and might be one of the things which, I mean, from a purely business standpoint, you might want to get people to play as Vader early to hook them in to get that glorious feeling of, yes, I'm playing Vader. But no, they decided to lock Vader behind, I think if memory serves, about sort of 40 hours of gameplay in order to get the currency in-game in order to buy him. Now that's kind of extreme, and one wonders if that amount of playtime would have been necessary were there no microtransactions in the game, and you wonder if the lengthy playtime to get such an iconic character was meant to encourage people to put their hands into their wallets and pay. And of course I say that you might be wondering about that. Nobody's actually wondering. Everybody knows that's what they're doing. Come on, EA. But so they walked some of that back. And how they did it was they cut the cost for buying characters across the board by 75%. So everything was now a quarter of the price that it was beforehand. Yay! That means less grinding to get Vader. If you're keeping up, that's about 10 hours of grinding. Still quite a long time for an iconic character, but not as extreme. However, what they did at the same time as this was they also cut the reward that you got for completing the campaign also by 75%. Which means that you end up with less money at the start to actually get you closer to buying Vader. So that was somewhat of a disappointment. It does remind me a little bit the Irish comedian Dara O'Brien. Come on, car, let me through. There we go. The Dara O'Brien had, where he noticed that video games are the only form of media where you are in some way tested before being given what you have bought. A book doesn't ask you, hey, what are the themes of war and peace before letting you get on to the second chapter, right? But games do this all the time. And sometimes it's a skill challenge, which is the case in, you know, pretty much all single-player games. That's some form of skill challenge. You can't get to the next level until you've completed the previous level, and you need to have performed well enough to complete the previous level. But this, where you're buying characters for use in multiplayer games, that's just a time investment. I mean, there's an amount of skill investment as well, but it's a grind. It's saying, are you dedicated enough to get this character? Okay. And there was a particularly odious remark linked to this, which, let me see if I can pull it up quickly. Yeah, this statement I was looking for is actually connected to a related part of this whole Battlefront issue, and that's the loot box system, which again, many of you might have heard of, and is again asking you to pay real-world money in order to get gameplay benefits. There are cards you get in these which will directly affect your stats, and the more of these... Oh, red light! There we go, perfectly legal. And the more of these you get, the higher chance of getting higher level cards. Now, let's possibly take it away from Battlefront a little bit. Don't worry, we'll be coming back to them. But let's take a look at the idea of loot boxes in general, where even in their most benign form, you might just have some visual cosmetic items in loot boxes, and that is all that you're going to get in there. Now let's have a look at this statement. Come on, give me my map back. Where's my map? Okay, still going forward. Let's... Oh. Yeah. Gosh darn it, I can't actually see the lights. I'll just go when they go. But there was a statement from EA about their loot boxes, which says... Let me actually turn this corner before I actually read it out. So it says that a player's ability to succeed in the game is not based on earning crates. Oh, that's very nice, isn't it? You don't want people to be punished for not buying crates. However, what do EA mean when they say succeed? Oh, come on, there we go. Success means different things to different people. And if you look at, let's take the Pokemon franchise, I'm sure that many of you have heard of it. Some people like getting the best battling team. Perfectly valid. Other people like to just collect Pokemon. Other people like to get the prettiest. Others like to get shinies. Success in games depends on who you are. There we go, let's do that. Am I at the place I need to be? No. So, in a game where you're just a multiplayer game, say just a multiplayer game, that sounds a bit condescending. When you're a multiplayer game with competitive elements, which has cosmetics for your character, which has different weapons and so on, I can imagine a whole load of different ideas for success in this game. Only one of which is actually being better than everyone else in the game. Some people will enjoy that. Other people will enjoy making friends through the community. Others will enjoy making their character look exactly how they want their character to look, ways to express their individualism. Others might just want to get all of this stuff. And these are all valid. And some of these are harmed. Oh. I just get my truck fixed. Whoops. Sorry, car. Only some of these types of players are completely indifferent to the idea of content being behind a paywall or an exceptionally long grind. Other types of gamers might just want new experiences. and therefore saying that, yeah, you can have this new experience, but you're going to have to invest at least 40 hours into this game, or your money, which, remember, you've already paid in order to get the game. That's a little bit insane. And also feels somewhat counterproductive. And if we're going to take this cynically, you want to hook your players, you want to bait your whales before you can actually extract that tasty, tasty whale oil from them. And Darth Vader seems like they would be one of the ways of doing that. Come on, there. Is that enough? Nope. There we go. Okay, let's do this driving thing again. And since this has happened, we now have various gambling authorities in Belgium and the Netherlands looking into whether or not loot boxes constitute gambling. EA says they don't. Most of us with common sense say, yeah, they do. One of EA's defenses is that everything you earn in a loot box has gameplay benefit, therefore there's no gambling, because essentially you're paying for a gameplay benefit, not... and you're getting a gameplay benefit. But are they really saying that everything in a loot box has equal value? Everything you have a chance of getting in a loot box has equal value? That would seem somewhat absurd. I mean, it would also suggest that there aren't such things as playstyles in your game, which would suggest that, in fact, your multiplayer game is really quite boring, EA. Is that what you're saying? That your multiplayer game doesn't let you play in different ways? That it's boring? Eh, what do I know? So yes. I mean, the obvious refutation to that, also, is... okay, we're going to give you... if you give me $10, we're going to give you one random thing. Now you have a 99% chance of getting 1 extra hit point in your game, or you have a 1% chance of getting 100 extra hit points. Right, both of these items have gameplay value, but one of them is quite significantly better than the others. You wouldn't say the two people who opened the loot box and one got 1 HP bonus, the other got 100 HP bonus. You wouldn't say that they got the same value out of their loot box. Right, you'd calculate the value ahead of time with what you'd expect to get in there. But it's how wildly things vary that makes it more like gambling than a purchase to me. If you knew what you were getting with your microtransactions of old, that would still be, depending on how much they were charging for it and how much content was already in the game, that might be reasonable, that might be okay. Right, I'm perfectly fine with microtransactions, I'm perfectly fine with paid DLC. Oh, do you want to go either ahead or behind, car? But it's this gambling thing which has me. I might have talked about this before, but this is one of the reasons why I like living card games. Things like Android Netrunner over your old trading card games like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic. In that when you buy a set, you know exactly what you're getting. They drip out content every month or so to give you some new cards, new things to buy, but you can look at the cards ahead of time, decide, these ones aren't particularly for me, I'm happy with what I've got, I'm going to give this a miss. And it's not just trying to keep you on the hook indefinitely, trying to get that shiny Charizard. But this is where we are in the games industry. And of course, this has now gone further, as many of you will know, in that EA have now agreed to completely drop microtransactions from the game. Now this of course makes me wonder how the people who've already paid for things in the game feel, particularly when they drop the costs for things. They can't have felt too happy about stumping up the money to unlock Darth Vader in advance. But unfortunately I don't think there was any way for EA to get out of this with any dignity. I mean, they're not exactly known for being a dignified company to start with, but everything they did was going to upset somebody. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, really. Okay. So what was next on my list? Ah, yes, this one was slightly lighter, but also slightly not. So, we've all heard of Russia. Now, they released a photograph earlier this week, I believe, which they claimed showed US forces collaborating with ISIS fighters and covering their retreat. That would be scandalous if it were true. American forces helping to keep a terrorist state alive, putting themselves at risk in order to help Daesh, to help ISIS. That would be horrific. Turns out the photo was a screenshot from a video game. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Yeah, let's actually stay on the road. Unfortunately, concentrating at two screens at once is not the easiest. Let's get on a straight bit of road. There we go. Yes, it was from a game called Gunship Simulator. Which sounds like a dreadful name for a game, although I can't talk. I'm currently playing a simulator game right now. But yes, not only did they take a screenshot from a game, they took it from a YouTuber's page who was playing the game and trying to pass it off as their own intelligence. And I told this story to my partner earlier this morning, and her response was, have we fallen into a parody universe? Because that's what it feels like, doesn't it? Where countries... This was the Russian Ministry of Bloomin' Defense, right? This wasn't a Russian blogger. This wasn't some Putin flunky trying to make some sort of statement or anything like this. This was an official statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense that video games are real, apparently. I mean, there are surely enough real atrocities in the world that all sides have gotten involved in. I mean, we only need to hear the words Guantanamo Bay, and we can immediately think of some quite severe wrongdoings by American soldiers. Or, if you're Australian, Manus Island. But in order to doctor something, it boggles the mind. And I can't really see why they would have... what they were hoping to achieve with that. I mean, propagandize as much as you want, but doesn't Russia have people who can use Photoshop? I mean, North Korea do. We see that all the time. Russia couldn't be bothered to Photoshop a real fake news story, so they ended up taking a video game. What interesting times we live in, eh? But the slightly more sinister, quote-unquote, actual story, which has been coming out recently, is net neutrality again. I'm sure that many of you thought that we were done with that. That net neutrality was a thing of the past. John Oliver had fixed net neutrality. We all know that. But no, it's coming under fire again. So for those of you who don't know, the net neutrality rules essentially mean that web providers can't give beneficial speeds to particular websites. That essentially you can't have an ISP say to Netflix, "Hey Netflix, what wonderful original programming you've got. It would be such a shame if your internet speeds all slowed to a crawl and that people couldn't access your content easily," and then essentially extorting Netflix for more money. That's what the net neutrality rules are there to stop. They're also there to make sure that, all other things being equal, it's as easy for people to access your cousin's homemade jewelry business as it is for them to get stuff off Amazon or Etsy. Right? It's a basic leveling of the playing field. Now, what some people might say is, hey, but when we've got shops in real life, they haven't got a level playing field. If you're in a shopping mall, you can't have everything in a shopping mall, and some places are just better than others. So people are going to have to pay higher rent for them, and this is true. Right, if you've got a shopping mall, then you're probably going to have some favourable places to do business. I would think that close to the food court would probably be beneficial, and therefore companies would pay more to set up shop there. But even if you had a completely fair shopping mall, let's suppose that your shopping mall were a completely regular decagon with shops on each of the 10 sides, and the food court in the middle, so everyone gets equal benefit from that, and the entrance is right in the middle, just people get teleported just into the middle of this shopping mall, so everything's completely fair. They enter faced in a random direction, so the first shop they see is always different, and so on and so forth, right? We've got a completely fair spatial area. Now, firstly, some shops don't need as large a shop floor as others, which brings in some inherent differences in how well they'll operate with the spaces provided. Right? Jewelers are probably going to need less space than a furniture shop. And secondly, let's come on, go, no, go ahead of me, go ahead, yep, there we go. And secondly, the shops that you're next to have relevance. So let's take that jeweler shop again. People who buy jewelry are looking to spend a decent amount of money. So you want to have people walking past who are already willing to spend a decent amount of money. Therefore, you probably wouldn't want to put your jewelry store next to, shall we say, a Poundland or a charity shop. That's probably not going to be helping you attract the sorts of people whom you'd get business from. You'd want high-value businesses. So your jewelry store might benefit from being next to, I don't know, an electronics retailer, sort of a high-end electronics retailer, or a high-end clothing store. Probably going to be slightly better for them. So those spaces would have more value for the jeweler than the spaces next to, say, a hardware store. Because people who go to a hardware store, it's generally a planned thing, they need to get a thing. So they're probably not going to be impulse purchasing any shiny things. So these are the restrictions that we're working with in meat space, shall we say. You don't have these on the internet. You don't have any inherent idea of adjacency unless your site happens to provide a link to another site. Right, but then that's entirely within your control. Your ISP isn't putting a banner up on your website saying, hey, WH Smith's is next to Waterstones. Right, that's not what's happening. So we don't have this inherent asymmetry going on here. Where am I actually going? Let's let's get out of here. I really should put my destination up there. I'm going to London. Okay. So that would be going to Harwich. But the idea of having a non-neutral internet is somewhat more like the shopping mall deciding to waft the scent of manure outside of shops that didn't pay them extra money. Right, they're deliberately slowing down, or they're deliberately making it less convenient or less pleasant to access these particular websites. And they might try and relate it to physical stores by the argument that I've used above. But if we could get rid of that, don't you think we would? I mean, that's kind of what we've been trying to do with the internet by giving things a level playing field so that the best things can survive. It's kind of basic capitalism. And I know that some of you might say, yes, but capitalism means that we should be able to pay for anything. But it turns out that some things will start breaking your capitalism, like making you invest 40 hours to get Darth Vader. Ah, synergy in our topics today. Capitalism only works if things are attainable. And by inherently making your business less viable, that makes the idea that your business is going to actually thrive less likely, makes you less willing to try it. It will harm entrepreneurial instincts. Which is not good. I mean, we're always a bit leery to see the internet regulated. And for good reason. But if we don't have this regulation, then a lot of what makes the internet will be damaged. And it will mean that it's still regulated, just regulated by corporations rather than government, who are much more brazen in trying to further their own interests. I'm not saying that governments don't try to further their own interests, they do. But they can't afford to be quite as transparent. It's still transparent, just not as transparent. So, if you are American, or even if you are not, I would suggest sending an email to the FCC chair, Ajit Pai. His email is freely available, and telling him exactly what you think of revoking net neutrality. Be civil. Don't send him hate mail. But public opinion is important here. And the second part of this story is that this news was supposed to be revealed around Thanksgiving time, so that people wouldn't be paying attention. And this is a viable strategy for people who might do things to be in the news, right? You want to have any negative stories about you have the least impact. And you've got to wonder why we have a system which lets that happen. How we don't boil over with anger whenever we see people trying to so brazenly manipulate the system to try and hide their bad aspects. This thing, it's not new. About, what, 15 years ago, the Netflix had its... The Netflix? Oh, wow. That wasn't even close to what I wanted to say. The West Wing had its Take Out the Trash Day, where the staff of the White House would dump all of their bad news stories in one block to try and get as little written about them as possible. And the fact that this is a thing is... It was abhorrent then, it's abhorrent now. It's treating politics like a game. And it's not just done by politicians. Right? Everybody seems to treat politics as a game, as an abstract concept where you win and lose, and they fail to see that actual lives matter. And now you might say, okay, these politicians, they think that what they're doing is right for the most amount of people. Right? We know that not all politicians think that way, but let's say that they do, for the sake of argument. Let's say that every politician is working off the best of intentions, is idealistic, and just thinks that what they want is right. Therefore, they are not going to stop at anything to try and enact that. They are going to release any bad things about them at days where nobody will read it. They will try and hide as much as they can. They will try to do backroom deals with other politicians to try and get what they want through. And that's moral. Right? If you think that what you're doing is right for the most people, and you have strong reason to believe this, you kind of have a moral duty to try and see that done. But the system shouldn't let that be done. The system should say, okay, in politics we don't have easy answers. Let's try and have as many people as we can talk about this, to formulate their opinions, and to give reasoned and healthy discussion on this topic. I mean, one of the things that gets so lauded in the UK is Prime Minister's questions. Right? For those of you... Where am I? There. For those of you who don't know, once a week, the Prime Minister of the country has to stand up in front of the House of Commons without any form of prepared speech or anything like that, and just answer questions. And it becomes somewhat like a schoolyard shouting match. It's not dignified. You get booing, you get cheering, you get... Actually, recently, you get instances of people deliberately trying to put off speakers, trying to get them out of their rhythm, so they can't make their arguments as well. Which again just seems to be trying to get around the system, turning these issues which matter to people. Right, this is one of the things that happened in the Australian plebiscite, in that you had a group of people saying, hey, why are you getting so upset about this? And another half saying, that's because you're debating about our human rights, whether we are as valuable as people as the rest of you. there is a place for abstraction. But you always have to remember that your abstract discussions, it matters. It affects things. Policy does not exist in a vacuum. We're not looking at... Am I going in here? Ooh. Yes, I think I am. We're not looking at some school kid writing up their ideas for how to make the best society. We are actually trying to do that, and that is going to make some people better off. It's going to harm some people. Policy has killed people. Right, cuts to the health service will almost certainly lead to people dying. Cuts to the policing will lead to more criminals getting away or possibly more crimes being committed. Cuts to education will harm everything. So we owe it to see the best form of the debate articulated, and treating it like a game, trying to get... Yeah, sure, why not? Let's do this one. Treating it like a game, even if you've made up your mind and heard all the arguments, it robs everyone else for hearing the arguments and therefore making decisions on who to elect. But we can't be too upset. We can be slightly upset. I'm on the wrong side of the road. But we can't be too upset at the politicians necessarily for doing this. We need to change the rules. Now, unfortunately, the people who can do that are the politicians. But that's what's really needed. It's like how you can't really get that upset at the bankers for being irresponsible with money, because the ones who were responsible were less likely to do well at banking, therefore they were more likely to get fired, and the banks that didn't do this were less likely to succeed. So it was really just... Oop, why am I going in that direction? Because I forget which direction to go in. It's really just survival of the fittest. Which is sad. Come on, let's hook up. But how do we change which things are the fittest? By changing the rules of the system. By changing the environment. But there's my political rant of the day. Done with. Oh. Ah, that's why I was slightly off centre. So, the last thing I saw, this seems to be a story from a little while back. Come on, just let me get in front of you. Oh, I hate this crossing. Am I good? Am I good? Please let me be good. I think I'm good. Right, so this was a paper, mathematical paper, released a little while back, I think, which tried to train a computer to be able to say what indie games were. Now, this is a contentious topic, right? And I'm not expecting that we're going to solve it over a game of Euro Truck Simulator. But it did get me thinking about whether the idea of a game being indie is useful or not. And there are some things, some labels which we attach to games which will tell us generally how well we'll like them. So for instance, the genre of a game. that'll tell us, generally, if it's our sort of thing. Right? If you like Overwatch, yes, we're in the right direction. If you like Overwatch, you're probably going to like other online shooters. Right? If you like Final Fantasy VI, you're probably going to enjoy Chrono Trigger. It's to express similarities between games. Now, what similarities, and I guess that's part of what this paper goes into, what similarities do indie or AAA games have? Generally, we've got something to do with budget. Generally, we've got something to do with size of team. So, independent games tend to be smaller, and we tend to afford them a little bit more leeway, because they might not have as many QA testers, they might have a few more bugs, they might not be as grand in scope. But does it affect how much... Ooh, thank you. I should have been looking out for that before. Where is the nearest petrol station? Okay, we've got one on our route. Good. What are we looking for when we buy games? We are looking for the highest engagement or fun, the highest engagement to cost ratio. And the more you spend on a game, the more you want to get out of it, the more engaged you want to be, the more fun you want to have, in order to make that seem worth it. Now, there is a difference between independent games and AAA games here. One bad game, one game that doesn't sell so well, isn't going to ruin a AAA developer, unless it's Mass Effect Andromeda. Right. You're not... I mean, you are benefiting the company by buying its games, but you're not really enabling it to make more games just by buying the single copy. That does become more true when you look at independent games. This is one of the reasons why you might be willing to give them more leeway, because with independent games, you're not just necessarily paying for the fun from their current project, but also for any future projects. Now, that future fun isn't guaranteed, so it's worth a lot less than current fun, shall we say. But it's still something that you might factor in, whether intentionally, explicitly, or not. So that might be a place where one difference comes in, but does it really affect how much we enjoy the particular game? I don't think so. I think I've gotten a lot of fun out of indie games, largely because they tend to be a bit more experimental, but not always. I think that it's probably more true to say that if you're an experimental game, you're more likely to be indie than it is to say you're an indie game, so you're more likely to be experimental. It's essentially because the big publishers tend to be less experimental, not that indie developers tend to be more experimental. It's might seem like a distinction without a difference, but it makes sense to me, shall we say. So why do we use it as a descriptor? I think it somewhat does serve as a catch-all term for experimental, or please excuse the flaws. Like, this game is indie, so it's not as photorealistic as the AAA games. Right? It changes our expectations of the thing. But I think over time we're going to get less and less of that. I think that independent development is getting more and more common, and even seeing sort of big name independent releases, things like No Man's Sky. Regardless of what you think of the actual gameplay of No Man's Sky, ooh, I should be coming off here. It is an independent studio which has done something on quite a large scope. Or Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. It's produced by a developer who were previously associated with AAA development, but now no longer. Has that team really changed that much? Should we be affording Ninja Theory the same leniency on bugs and models that don't necessarily look right as we would a smaller sort of bedroom developer? I don't think we would. I've not actually played Hellblade yet, so I'm not saying that we should level those criticisms at that game. But we would think that this team would know better. And so seeing as the only thing that the indie term really serves to give now is some form of cover, it seems somewhat disingenuous for them to call themselves an indie AAA game. Right, they're talking about the high production qualities whilst being independent. Indie isn't a genre, and clearly now it isn't a marker for quality, so why should we still use it? I mean, it's easy to, and other people use it, so it's kind of become part of the lingo that we will just accidentally use. I know I have. But I think it's probably worth trying to stop that, and just treating games as games. Okay, let's just navigate around here. So, I think that's going to be it from me this week. Oh! Will I damage anything? Nope. Good! So yes, as I crash into the side of a railing, I think that's roughly going to be it for me. There wasn't actually too much this week that caught my attention, beyond the stuff I've already talked about. So if you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe to my channel. And you will see me again next week, hopefully, with another Euro Truck soliloquy on various other things which have happened in the news. Let's just get onto this boat. I mean, really, if there isn't that much to talk about, that means that it must have been a fairly good week. But yes, please like and subscribe, and I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye.